Hello, my friends, and welcome back. I am so excited to introduce you to Jennifer Pepito. She is an author. She created the Peaceful Press. She has 7 children and has been homeschooling for 25 years. She has graduated 5 children from her program, with 2 students earning honors degrees from their preferred university and 1 pursuing a Juris Doctorate. When she discovered that her second daughter had learning disabilities, Jennifer became an avid student of child development, learning from innovators and researchers such as Carol Stock Kranowitz, Gordon Neufeld, John Taylor Gatto, Jane Healy, Maria Montessori, Kim John Payne, and Charlotte Mason. And then that is how the Peaceful Press resources were born out of her years and years of research. She has a passion for equipping families to homeschool in a way that is developmentally appropriate, spiritually nourishing, and based on proven methods of education. And she's also the author of Mothering by the Book that can help you overcome the fears that steal the joy so that you can savor motherhood. And she hosts the Restoration Home podcast. So Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I realized I need to update that bio because I have graduated 6 children now, and I have a new book, Habits for a Sacred Home. So, and a couple extra years of homeschooling. But my goodness, thank you so much for having me on here, Janae. I appreciate it.
Oh, you are so welcome. Now, when did your most recent book come out?
Yeah, Habits for a Sacred Home came out in May.
Oh, okay. So I will put a link to all of her books in the show notes for those that are interested in learning more. Okay, so let's start with how you've been. So you're up to 27 years of homeschooling. How did you decide, when and how did you decide to homeschool? Because now it's more commonplace, but then it wasn't.
Yeah, it's true. When I started, I had an older sister whose daughter was already at a Cardin school. So she was at a private educational kindergarten. And I was the only one in my family who was homeschooling that I knew. But we did have some friends at church who were homeschooling. Mm-hmm. And I just loved the way these families interact with each other. There was a big reason why we started, is the families that we knew who were doing the regular thing of sending their kids off to school. The kids and the parents didn't really seem like they liked each other very much. And this other family that we went to church with, there was just a lot of mutual respect and enjoyment. And that set a vision for me of what our family could be like. Because I was so excited about being a mom. I was thrilled to be with my kids and teach my children and just like be a really good mom. And I wanted what was best for them. Mm-hmm. And so for me, seeing how this one family interacted, I was like, well, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Why would I go through the effort and the time of birthing these children and then send them somewhere where they're not even going to like me anymore? And so
right.
I started so long ago with just one child and obviously added several more to our family and have never, ever looked back. I mean, it's been so much fun being with my kids. And we've used a variety of we are doing a charter school right now. We've done co-op classes. We've done dual enrollment. We've had them enrolled in different co-ops or whatever. But it's just been such a joy to be with them and to really learn with them. And so we've very much protected that time as a family that we've gained through homeschooling.
I love it. I love it. So as you started homeschooling, did you choose like a particular philosophy, or were you just kind of like, let's just buy some curriculums? Like, what did you do? Like, what was that process like for you?
Yeah, I was actually in a Charlotte Mason companion book club when my oldest was about 3 years old. In the Charlotte Mason companion book, she really gives an overview of a literature-based education where you read and you enjoy nature study and you look at art together, you read poetry. And so early on, I had a vision for what our education could be, not just being something that would draw our family closer, but would draw us closer around content that inspired our family. We were Christians, we loved being in nature, and so it was really fun to be able to incorporate the things that we already loved as a family into our home education. And so, yeah, I did early on get exposed to the philosophy of Charlotte Mason. That's been such a gift this whole way through. Through the years, I did try other things, like we read The Well-Trained Mind and added some of that in, but I don't think that that is incompatible with Charlotte Mason. There's just a little bit more of an emphasis on what you memorize. Charlotte Mason, we would more memorize poetry or things that were maybe sort of beauty subjects. Charlotte Mason doesn't talk as much about memorizing lists of states and capitals like a classical conversations or classical education as we know it would say. And then what I really never did though is traditional homeschooling. Like I was confident for whatever reason. And so while we might have here and there tried a workbook, I didn't have a lot of money to spend, like a box curriculum set can be $500 or something.
Right. Yeah.
So we didn't have that kind of money. But also when I did try, like, someone would give me a workbook or, we tried a little bit of Rod and Staff, which is more of an inexpensive box curriculum. But just the idea of having each child doing different subjects separately, it wasn't enjoyable. And I really wanted to enjoy my children, to savor our time together. And we found that was best done through reading together, through looking at beautiful stories, looking at art, and spending time together in nature, and then talking about what we were learning. And so it was very much a relationship heavy approach where we're not just educating our children, but we're also connecting as a family and making happy memories together, all of which contributes to a well-attached child who's mature and who is able to use their mind because they're in that relational state.
Well, and I think that's key too. That's one thing that I've realized how beautiful the relationships can be since homeschooling. And I noticed that you've looked at the work of Dr. Neufeld, and I'm a big fan of Dr. Neufeld. I think one thing that, like you, that struck me after we started and it wasn't until after we started homeschooling, was that parents could legitimately have a great relationship with their teens, that it didn't have to be the stereotypical, the teens hate the parents and they do their own thing and they're, like that baffled me when I joined the homeschooling world. I'm like, oh my gosh, these kids like their parents, and I could have my kids back. So I think I love that you bring up that relational piece, because I feel like that's the center really of homeschooling, is building that relationship, which that's something I loved that you talked about in the book, was really being present with the children, like, and that resonated with me as you talked about. Let me pull up the quote because I thought it was so beautiful. When you said, motherhood is not about perfection, it's about presence. And I'm like, yes. Oh shoot, I should put away my phone. So, I love that. So,
yeah. And when you look at the books that we read aloud, you can see that in those stories, like in Little Women, the girls really were enjoying the company of their mother. They didn't hate her. And in Little House on the Prairie, as they're growing, they love and respect their parents. There's not like this horrible relationship between Laura and her parents. In the Little Britches series, Ralph Moody, even after he leaves home, he still honors his mom, sends her letters, sends her money as he's able to. And so I think historically, people want to be in a good relationship with their parents. And if they're not, that might have been twisted through, parental issues. Like when you do see breakdown in the family, often it's because there's a parent who's an alcoholic or a parent who's not caring for their family well. But I think in normal situations, children want to be with their parents, but we have culture that's constantly, through movies, through books, through separating families. You have a culture that's against family closeness, but I don't think that is the norm, or the norm that we should be sort of shooting for.
No.
And of course, like if you've read Gordon Neufeld, you know that what he's saying is that when you have good attachment with your children, they will be more mature, they will be more responsible, and we will have healthier, safer societies.
Yes, it's true. It's true. So how has that helped your adult relationship, the relationship you have with your adult children? Because like now that they're adults, they've left the house, what does that relationship look like for you?
Yeah, I'm delighted to be in relationship with all of my children. I have homeschooled 6 children, 1 left to graduate. And all of my kids love me and they love Jesus. They love their dad and they love Jesus. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, it worked. And some of that though, Janae, because I did make mistakes throughout the years. Like if you read Mothering by the Book, you can see that I made mistakes. My fear did cause problems in our family. And I think the biggest mistake I made was not being more loving and honoring to their dad. Like I was accommodating my life to his big dreams, but there was a lot of like complaining or disappointment, things like that, just not choosing joy. And I think that was the biggest pain point for my kids. They recognize what a gift their childhood was. My daughter just texted last week, she's listening to podcasts on attachment parenting and messaging back saying you guys were fantastic parents. But I think that when we're afraid as parents, we tend to look very unhappy, and it makes our kids feel like they're the source of our unhappiness. And so that is where some of the disconnection in our family happened. But it's not ever irreparable. That's the beautiful thing, is that even if you feel like, oh my gosh, my kids are in high school now, they don't like me, they don't want to talk to me, it's never irreparable. And we've done this in several ways. We've gone back and said we were sorry for things. Like if something comes up with our kids, if they come to us with an issue, we never defend ourselves. We don't say, oh, we did this because of this, or here's why we did it, or it's because you did this. Like we never defend ourselves. My husband and I both are on the same page that if our kids come to us, we say, gosh, I did this and it made you feel this way, and it's my sincere desire to not bring this pain into your life again. Like we acknowledge the pain we caused them, because our identity is safe in Christ, and so we aren't trying to prove ourselves by our parenting. Yeah. And so so we can take that heat from our kids and be able to hold their pain for them, because later on they will be parents and they will understand how hard we tried and how well we did. Like some of them are getting to that point now, but we did make mistakes, and so I'm going to acknowledge that I made a mistake. But also beyond that, we do put in effort to be with our kids. We, take them out to dinner, or invite them over for dinner, or, have them all home for Christmas and take good care of them. We do our best as our kids move into those adult years to continue being a blessing. And I'm not saying, my kids are all hard workers, they pay their own way. Like we're not enabling them to not be mature adults, but we do definitely want to be in their lives. And so if we have the opportunity, we babysit, we're there for our kids even into the adult years.
I love that. Well, and that they know that they're still wanted even though they're not out of the house. It was interesting. I was on Facebook and somebody had posted a rant about that their parents didn't want to spend time with the grandkids, and their parents didn't want to spend time with them, and how hurtful it was for this person, and what should they do? And, and I thought, well, we're seeing the effects of attachment, that peer-oriented versus parent-oriented adults who have now grown up and now they're grandparents. And yet it still matters into adulthood. It matters that you want to spend time with your grandkids. It matters to your kids that they're still seen, they're still loved, because we're still the parents.
Yeah.
So I love that.
And I feel that from my own parents. Like my own parents, they call us. If, my son got married a week or, last month, my son got married.
Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. And my parents were there towards the end of the ceremony. They're both in their 70s, and they were there towards the end of the whole party to help us clean up and help us do the breakdown of the wedding, basically. So my parents have definitely set that kind of example of really being there. And in my book, Mothering by the Book, that I didn't always feel super loved by my mom in childhood, but as an adult, my mom has made up for that. Like and I'm not saying, because sometimes it's just our perceptions. Like I was molested as a child, that made a difference in how I perceived the world. But whether it was my mom's, lack of attention, or whether it was my own filter, whatever, as an adult, I know full well that my parents adore me. They're very much there for me. They've been there. Like if I needed help with, if I did need babysitters, they would have been here for me. And so I think that, it's never too late to repair those relationships. and also to see the good in each other. Because I think it does take also, my kids have been willing to forgive us. I know so many people who they won't speak to their parents. Like
Yeah.
they are holding the things that their parents have done over their heads, and they won't be in relationship. And that's a tragedy, because the way that we treat our parents, our kids are watching.
Yeah.
And that, it really hit hard when I visited my daughter. My daughter was now an adult. She was living away at university in the UK, and I went to visit her in her home. And it was like a whole new thing for me to recognize, oh my gosh, I am a visitor in my child's home. My child has the choice of either choosing to have me visit or just choosing to be with her friends, and she chose me, and I do not take this lightly, and so it's really changed the way I treat my parents, because my kids are watching how I talk about my parents, how I treat my parents, and I'm setting up the stage for how they will treat me.
Yeah, it's true. It's
And
true.
I think that probably needs to hit a little harder for some moms, because it's easy, to mistreat a mother-in-law, or to be neglectful, to not really call or put in any effort towards your parents or your in-laws. And man, someday your kids and the people they marry, they're going to choose how to treat you. And if they've seen you set an example of just complete disregard for your parents when they have their own families, like right now, you guys might be the tightest family ever, but if they see you mistreat your extended family, then when they have their own wife, there's the saying, a son is a son until he takes a wife, a daughter is a daughter for life. And the truth is, your child is going to have to choose the new partner over you. And so what you've sowed is going to determine like how much, and we don't have any control over our kids. Once they're adults,
Right.
they are their own people. They get to choose. But I think that we are setting a standard, and we're setting sort of a pattern of behavior that our kids will emulate.
It's true. But I always think about the song, The Silver Spoon, like the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon. And one of my kids said that to my husband, and he was like, cat's in the cradle, Dad. Cat's in the cradle. He's like,
Oh my gosh, what did your husband say?
he's like, I heard you loud and clear. Thank you. Like, I will fix it. Because he was like, I have to work tonight. Cat's in the cradle, Dad.
Oh,
Cats in the cradle.
That would hit. Especially because, like for your, I don't know how your son even heard the song. 'Cause it's
I played it for them one day.
Oh, yeah.
Mistakenly. Probably shouldn't have.
Yes, I know that song well. Oh my gosh.
So, well, let's talk about a little bit about Peaceful Press. Like what you started studying all these different educators with your daughter. Tell that story. What happened?
So my daughter, I was homeschooling using the Charlotte Mason method with my oldest daughter. And we'd done a little bit of workbooks here and there, whatever, but she was a really easy learner. And then I had my second child who, at the time, there wasn't a lot of research or information about like sensory processing disorder or processing disorders, neurodiversity, things like that.
Yeah.
And so I was like really at a loss, and it wasn't working to just, do the same things that I did with the oldest child weren't working with the second child. She needed a lot more of everything. And so as I was researching, I started, doing research into like neurodevelopmental, occupational therapy, speech therapy, auditory therapy, all of these, when my daughter would have an appointment, I would go along and I would take notes, I would study, I would read the books that the therapists were reading, so that I understood like what's going on with her development. Why are things more difficult for her? And that's how the Peaceful Press was born. Like a lot of kids are going to do fine with, just your basic language arts program or whatever. But some kids actually, they need more motor skills. If they are going to be able to put their finger across a page and follow the letters from the left from left to right, they're going to need more tracking skills, more visual tracking skills. And you can build that through, letting them pour water from a pitcher into a cup, or letting them scoop sand from a bowl into a sandbox or whatever. All of these kinds of activities where your eyes are following what your hands are doing develop the skills you need to read. listening to stories, listening to poetry, clapping out syllables. Those kinds of activities help develop the auditory awareness to be able to sound out words. And if you don't do those underlying motor skills activities, many kids are going to struggle. It's going to take them longer to read. They're going to maybe deal with some dyslexia. But if we can work on some of those foundational things early, instead of just racing straight for the ABC worksheets, your kids are going to have an easier time learning to read. And so in the Peaceful Preschool, my first resource, we have activities like, tracing a letter in sandpaper and then sounding out the phonogram sound as they're tracing it, or tracing it in glitter glue and sounding out the phonogram sound. And so as they're doing these, tracing, tracking their letters, listening, auditory awareness skills, it's developing what they need to be really fluent readers as the time goes on, to be great communicators. And for some children, they don't necessarily need all that extra motor skills work, but most do, especially today where fewer kids are getting extended playtime outside, more kids are on screens. The more they're on screens in the early years, the more they need these kinds of motor skills activities. And so I wrote that first curriculum, and it was, an instant hit. It has won awards. But then my sisters were using Classical Conversations, which is a great resource for finding community. It's a really solid body of content. But because they were doing the Foundations program and they're going to the program, they weren't actually reading aloud very much to their children. And I was like, oh no, like the reading aloud is what helps develop our children's imagination. It's what helps develop virtue. It's what helps develop a family culture. It's what helps them understand critical thinking and how the world works. So you can't skip reading aloud for just a bunch of grammar worksheets, like, or some kind of like a little history text where you read something and you fill in the blanks. Like, they're not going to remember the dates that the pioneers crossed the prairie like they'll remember the story of, Laura's pa felling logs and dragging them up to the prairie and Ma trying to help him and the log rolling down and crushing Ma's ankle. Like, they can retell those stories and then really have an understanding that maybe sparks them looking into why Pa had to leave the land because the Native Americans were taking the land back, or it's going to, why there were all these different Scandinavian settlers in this one area. Like, they might dive deeper into the historical events that were going on around them if there's a story.
Yeah.
But if it's just facts, they're going to remember it and forget it as fast as it comes in. And so that's when I started writing the Peaceful Press elementary resources, is I really wanted to make a Charlotte Mason education accessible for families who maybe are new homeschoolers and they don't have the energy to pull everything together from Ambleside Online. Maybe families who just have a different set of interests, because some of the Charlotte Mason resources out there are still using the same books that she read in the 1800s. And there are some books that might be more applicable to American children or might be more interesting to modern children without sacrificing those virtues and those values and the quality of a living book. So the Peaceful Press elementary resources really focus on beautiful books, virtuous books, and incorporating the art and the handicrafts and nature study in the curriculum, so you're not having to pull together hundreds of dollars worth of resources.
Well, and I love that you've made it affordable. That was, and I mentioned this to you, but I'll tell the listeners. A couple years ago, I had picked up, a friend of mine had suggested The Playful Pioneers through Peaceful Press, and I bought it, and we did it, and we loved it, and it was simple, and it wasn't complicated, and my youngest has sensory processing disorder. And which is funny because as I was re-listening to your book in the car and you talk about sensory processing disorder, she was in the back and she's like, oh, I also have sensory processing disorder. And we call that her superpower because she feels so deeply, and so we talk about that. But she loved it, and she loved all of the extra sensory experiences because she needs that input. And it was interesting because it took her a very long time to learn to read. She didn't read until almost 8. She was 7.5, and she couldn't read. We tried phonics and we tried the different things, and then I let it rest for a while. And then we read aloud, but we were religious about reading aloud. And then one day she just got it. And she's like, I know these words. I know I can read this, and she was so excited, but it took her a little bit longer because of all of the sensory things. And so I loved that the Playful Pioneers had all those fun activities that they could do, that meant something to her.
Yeah.
So I loved
And
it.
and I think sometimes people get thrown by, oh my gosh, like you're going to make me bake bread with my kids, or, they want it to just be got over with. You know what I mean? They want to just get through the worksheets and be done. But the things that you get from that, for one thing, you get STEM skills. Like if you want your children to someday maybe have a career in science or engineering, doing those kinds of projects gives them a great foundation. Like they understand how the world works, how matter works. It gives them so much understanding when they do projects. It also works on comprehension. When you guys as a family have to read through a recipe together and try and figure out how it's going to work, or read through a pattern, or read through instructions for a craft and try and figure that out. Like think of the reading comprehension that's being worked out as you're doing that together. And then the happy memories, like all of those projects that you do together create these happy memories. And when we think happy thoughts, it puts us in this positive relational state where we're able to learn more easily. And so there are so many positive attributes to just incorporating some of these projects into our homeschool that you just about can't put like a grade on, or you can't necessarily measure, but they have so much impact on our children's learning.
Well, and I think it's important too that things are put into context. I had interviewed John Muir Laws actually yesterday, but it's not coming out for a few weeks. And that's one thing he and I had talked about is he's like, kids don't like math because they don't understand the context, like how it fits contextually. It's like we learn math facts, almost like if we were to learn spelling and grammar, but never read a beautiful book, that we don't learn things. But I loved how you combine it all. And yeah, it's the baking bread part is the great part. It's all of those extra activities that we do together that build the relationship. That was the fun part, the part that they most like, the part that I most like too, like that's what brought us together. So I love that you added those.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that you pointed that out too, because families who are just pulling their kids from school, I think sometimes they're worried about their children falling behind. But if you pull your kids from school, like chances are they have been, because of the way that testing works, the basics have been hammered into them. And what they might need is just a little season of doing more, reading and painting and thinking and writing and, doing just some more like pleasure-centered schoolwork so that they can kind of develop a sense of who they are again, or even reignite some of the wonder of childhood that might have been lost through that utilitarian form of schooling.
It's true. Well, and I tell every person that that I talk to that's leaving the system, I always say, you want to read together, read together, read together, even into teenage years. I know it's a totally new concept. Do it into teenage years, even after they've started reading. And what's blown me away is how it's the simple things that the homeschooling community does that unites the family, that matters. If you ask my 12-year-old son on any given day what his favorite part of the day is, he will tell you it's always the same two things. Reading with you, Mom, because he and I read together. He has his own book, and then I do a read aloud with the kids. But then each of the kids, I have a book that I read with them, and I read to them, and we just snuggle. And he's like, it's reading with you and hanging with my siblings. Those are my two favorite parts of the day. And it doesn't matter how great the experience was, whatever field trip he did at the co-op or whatever field trip he did at an enrichment program, it always comes down to, no, it was when I was with my family, when we were reading, when we were doing the things that mattered, like the things that don't seem to matter to the rest of the world, but they are that's the biggest deal,
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about mothering by the book. What inspired you to write Mothering by the Book?
Yeah, I just really recognized how much my fear had cost my family, and I see that so much in homeschool moms and every mom. We're just so concerned about getting it right, and that can often steal a lot of the joy out of motherhood. And as I worked through and kind of reparented my inner child in a sense, or worked through some of those toxic thought patterns, so much of that joy came back to me. Like I once again was able to enjoy learning with my children, to even do new things myself, like writing a book and putting a podcast out there. Those kinds of things came from being a lot less self-aware and a lot more God-aware, And I don't mean like, I think there's so much to be said for being self-aware and not being oblivious to who we are and the impact we have in the world. But I think sometimes we're just constantly judging ourselves. There's not really a lot of enjoyment or freedom. And when I started this process, and I detail it in the book, of forgiveness and taking toxic thoughts captive and having a vision, as I worked on that process, so much of the joy came back to me that I think I had when I was a young child, of being creative and innovative and having great ideas and just really enjoying God. And so Mothering by the Book is about overcoming your own fear so that you can enjoy your children and really capture that joy and that wonder of childhood again, for them and with them.
Oh, I love that. And then you also wrote Habits for a Sacred Home. Did I get that title right?
Yeah, you did.
Tell us a little bit about Habits for a Sacred Home.
Yeah, that's my newest book. It came out in May, and it's in the top 100 for Christian family books. And it's all about putting into practice some of the Christian values that were maybe sort of standard and have been less highlighted. Things like stewardship or simplicity, or prayer, order, work. There's all these different values, and they actually come from the rule of Saint Benedict. He was a monk in the around 500 years after Christ, and he developed this, what is called a rule of life, and he developed monasteries around the rule of life. And many people say that this monastic movement saved civilization, that because they were writing these things down, and they were keeping civilization alive through literature and through recipes and through just sort of an orderly way of living, because at the time it was the Dark Ages, and so a lot of literature was being lost. There wasn't a lot of progress in science or the arts or things like that. People kind of just had their heads down. They're trying to survive in a sense. And so they're saying that the monastic movement did save civilization because they had some order, and creativity is built on order. Like if you want to, be a great artist, you have to put in the time, the daily habit of painting. If you want to be a great writer, you have to put in the daily habit of writing. And so as a family, there are daily habits that we have to put into practice if we want to have any kind of relationship. Like if I want to have a peaceful, happy home with my children, I have to teach them to pick up after themselves, because otherwise I'm going to just spend all my time picking up after them instead of sitting on the couch talking with them. If I want to have a simple life where everyone has a chance to attune with God and to spend time with God, then we have to cultivate a daily prayer and Bible reading habit. Because if we don't cultivate some kind of knowledge of His Word and some kind of quiet time, and we're just scrolling our phones all the time, we won't be able to capture that time that it takes to enjoy His presence and to really build a foundation of knowledge of God. And so I think there's so many ways right now in culture where normal daily practices are being eroded. People don't sleep at any particular hours. They, a lot of people have a hard time getting to work, and I think this book was especially birthed during COVID in California, when civilization, in a sense, screeched to a halt. There were supply chain issues. People didn't want to go to work because they were afraid of leaving their houses. People were getting paid by the government to stay home, which put us in billions of dollars of deficit, trillions for the country at large. And so, civilization ground to a halt. And I don't think we've fully recovered from that. There was a season where there was an expectation that somebody else would be responsible for you, but that doesn't work. That won't work in the long run. And so people who are going to make it in society and culture are going to be people who know how to take care of themselves, who know how to put in the daily habits that make sure food gets put on the table and people get taken care of, people get educated. And that does take some effort that's maybe a little bit out of the comfort zone of a lot of people in culture today. And I think that's why there's even, some people say, a worrisome population decline, because people are barely capable of taking care of themselves, much less raising another human. But when you start putting in the habits of work and self-discipline and order and rhythm, then you are able to not just make your world a better place, but make the world a better place for your family and your community.
It's true. I just had this conversation with a couple of friends yesterday about our observation with the young 20-somethings, that so many of them, number one, live their lives in isolation now, but then two, they have a really hard time with basic life habits, like being able to be a human being, because those things hadn't been cultivated for them, because we were talking about the different people that we knew and how they've just become recluses. And it seems to be a consistent pattern for a lot of people. But it's true. Like I was thinking about this. So I started walking during COVID. That's when I started walking, and I'm like, this is such a simple thing, but it has such magnificent benefits for my psychological health, for my spiritual health, for my body, but yet it's that idea of small hinges swing big doors. And the scripture study, like spending time in the word, has lifelong effects. But yet you're right. Like, how many times do we choose the screen and scrolling over making those habits,
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
It's just, it is life-changing, really, for ourselves, for our families, when we can recognize. I mean, for one thing, I think as moms, we just do need to recognize how powerful what we're doing is, because it can be easy. Like, you could, all of you in the whole family, stay on the screen all day long, order in food as long as you can afford to do that, and really live like very isolated lives, even in a family. And yet there's, a lot of virtue is not being taught in that way. And so then when your children have their own decisions to make about, will I raise a family, or will I just live selfishly for myself? Like, the world is going to end. Do you know what I mean? It's like, there's, and so for me, like, I'm living for a legacy. I'm living for a higher purpose. I'm living for God. I'm living for, what what will happen on the other side. But also I'm living with a very much awareness of my impact today here. You know what I mean? Like, what we do does matter. And so for moms to recognize, like, just sitting around the table with your children to have a meal together has been proven to allay many forms of societal issues, like drug abuse, obesity, things like that are often, the chances are much lower your children will engage in those if you just eat dinner as a family together. And so some of these really simple practices, reading the Bible together, or praying together, or eating a meal around a table and looking each other in the eyes, like, these things are very countercultural.
Yeah.
And when you do them, you are making an impact, a big impact in the world.
It's true. And I think about all these young 20s who are stuck, and we can change that for our children. You know what I mean? Like, we can make that difference. So we don't have the next group of 20-somethings that are like, I'm an isolated person who cannot survive, who can't function as a human.
Absolutely.
What would you say has been your biggest challenge over the years with homeschooling, watching your kids get older? What have been the biggest challenges for you?
Yeah, I mean, probably the biggest challenge, Janae, is just the sadness of that season being over. Like, I love homeschooling my kids. Like, it was such a joy every morning to read out loud to my children. But like, now my son, he takes a class every morning. He's in a math class, biology twice a week, and geometry twice a week. And so I don't get to do my morning time routine anymore. And all of the amazing field trips we took, like, we would go, visit different creeks and go get coffee places, go to museums, go to art museums. I mean, we just had so much fun together. All the projects we did, we dipped beeswax candles and made things and built teepees. And I mean, it just had so much fun as a family. And I'm super sad those days are over with my own children, but I'm so thankful I get to continue doing that stuff with my grandkids. Like my son and his daughter were over last week, and we rolled beeswax candles together, and then we made clay candle holders. And the baby was sitting there. She's 2.5, so she was playing with the clay while my son and I were doing a little bit more detailed clay work. But it's just such a joy to be able to continue doing hands-on learning with my grandchildren, because there's so much joy in working with our hands, and even more joy when you're doing it with people you love.
Do you think your kids will want to homeschool their kids?
I think so. I mean, most of them have said that they will.
That's awesome. What would be last bit of advice would you give new homeschooling families?
Yeah, I think first of all, I would say, like, wow. Do I have to narrow it down to one thing?
No. Because if you've got some good nuggets, we'll take them all.
I had thoughts and they kept running into other thoughts. I mean, reading my book, Mothering by the Book, I think would be a good place to start. And so what I would say is overcome fear. Overcome fear. Fear will kill your homeschool, because the schools aren't getting it right. Like when COVID happened, I mean, my daughter, she graduated with a Juris Doctorate on cryptocurrency, decentralized finance regulation. So it's a subject I don't even really understand. And she wrote a thesis with no corrections on it. And I homeschooled her. So I think I was already pretty sure of myself as a homeschooler because of how well she did. But then when COVID happened and they shut down the schools and sent kindergartners home to learn on Zoom, I was like, these people do not care about our children. They don't care about our children. They don't know what they need. And we do not need any longer to be under this thumb of worrying about what the schools are going to say or if we're doing it right. Like, I'm sorry, they've not proven that they have the right to speak into our families' lives. And so, it's unfortunate that there are bad people out there in the schools and in the homes who abuse kids, but to judge all homeschoolers based on some bad people is crazy.
Yeah.
You have to shut down all the schools for sure if you judge the schools on some bad teachers. I mean, you see every day teachers being abusive in classrooms. But and I know there are good teachers. Like, I'm not saying that all schools are bad or that all teachers are bad. There are wonderful teachers. I'm sure there are wonderful schools. But we, as caring, intentional homeschool parents, do not need to be under this oppression of fear that we're going to mess up our kids or they're going to learn the wrong thing. And the book I'm writing right now, it'll come out next year. I think that's going to be really helpful for families, because when you look at people who've done great things in history, so many of them had iffy education. They either maybe had specialized education or they didn't have a lot of education. Like, you can look throughout history, there's hundreds of people who were homeschooled who accomplished really amazing things. And I think it partly was because they were homeschooled and because they weren't having all of their time overwhelmed with worksheets and twaddle. It's a word we use for work that's just busy work. Then they had the time to think deeper and come up with big solutions or even big problems that they wanted to solve. And so I think that overcoming the fear is just the first step, because then you will be confident enough to, like doing the Peaceful Press resources. It does take a little bit of a leap of faith, because we're not just a bunch of worksheets. You have to actually read to your children and give them some time to think about what they read. And that can take a little bit of faith. But when you overcome fear and give your children a little bit more margin and space and give them beautiful stories instead of little worksheets that you can just show somebody that you did something, the learning is so much deeper. What they accomplish will be more beautiful. And so, but it takes overcoming fear before you can even get to that point.
It's true. I have to share, yesterday I was having a conversation with another homeschool mom, and her husband happens to be over admissions, and he's also a professor at a I won't say which university it is, but it's a very prestigious university that is very, very, very difficult to get into. And she said, it's funny because my husband told me that the admissions department, and he's on the committee, she goes, people are always afraid, like, oh, homeschoolers can't get into college, and they say these ridiculous things. And he said, as a committee, if we see that it says they were homeschooled and their test scores are equal or better than their counterpart public school peers, we will 100% of the time pick the homeschooler over. And I think it's interesting because we do have these fears like, oh my gosh, I'm going to screw them up. And yet, the reality is the education that we can give them it's beautiful. I love that you keep bringing up beauty and peace and just this goodness. So thank you. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
No, it's just been a joy to chat with you. And actually, I talk a lot about some of these subjects on my podcast, Restoration Home Podcast, and we have a special coupon code, Restoration10.
Oh, perfect.
That your listeners can also use to get 10% off anything in my shop. Like sometimes people who are thinking about doing a literature-based education just almost need like a little sample of what that looks like. And so, there's a 1 month unit on New England or a 1 month unit on the garden. People could grab a resource like that and just sort of dabble as they're trying to decide,
that's awesome.
Can I even do something like this?
Thank you so much. And I will put the links to that in the show notes. So if you want to check that out and get that discount, I'll put that code in the links for you listeners. Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time today to come on and share with us your wisdom and just your inspiration. I find you so inspirational. So thank you for influencing me and affecting my life. Mamas and papas, grandmas and grandpas, you're doing better than you think you are, and you've got this. We'll talk next week.